What if you woke up, and the world was gone? No screams. No sirens. No goodbye. Just silence. A city frozen mid-breath. Clocks blinking midnight. Coffee still warm on empty tables. And then, a voice. Whispering through the static. Calling you by name. Tonight, we enter a story not just about the end of the world, but what waits after. A man haunted by memory. A stranger who may not be human. A fracture in reality that pulls everything toward the unknown. And a final choice, between fear and something far more terrifying: hope. Have you ever looked at someone and felt they weren't meant for this world? Have you ever trusted something you didn't understand? Stay with me. Because what begins in silence doesn't always end there. Ethan walked through a city that no longer breathed. The traffic lights blinked endlessly, but there were no cars, no pedestrians. Only silence, thick, electric silence. Shadows seemed to stretch slightly too far, like they remembered people who once stood there. Leaves drifted slowly through the air, yet the trees didn't move. The wind existed, he could feel it, but it made no sound. Not even a whisper. In a cafe, cups of coffee still steamed, untouched. On a school chalkboard, a half-finished sentence read, "What makes us real is..." and nothing more. He spoke into the void. His voice echoed, but sometimes, it didn't come back. That night, Ethan stared at the stars. He noticed a new one, dim, pulsing, watching. He carved into the wall. Day 1, silence. And the chalk cracked in his hand. The city had become a museum of memory. In the library, every book sat open as if mid-conversation. He walked past children's drawings taped to the walls, faded with time. He paused at one, a stick figure family, smiling under a sun with 8 rays. He touched it. The paper was warm. At a boutique store, mannequins faced each other, frozen mid-gesture. Like they had once laughed, or argued, and were caught in time. He placed hats on them, gave them names. "You're Myra. You're Tom. You're still here, right?" But at night, their heads turned slightly, just enough to notice. He dreamed of music with no melody. Of corridors stretching into stars. Of someone whispering, gently, over his shoulder, "You are not alone." But when he turned, nothing. Only a mirror. And in the reflection, not quite his own face. On the 14th day, when Ethan's belief in humanity had already begun to rot at the edges, he heard footsteps, not echoes of his own, but firm, heavy, and unmistakably real. He followed the sound through the cracked shell of a shopping mall, past shattered display windows and escalators locked mid-climb. Then, from the smoke and silence, a figure emerged. The man was tall, broad, covered in ash and sweat, a crowbar in one hand, a small red fire axe in the other. His eyes were sharp, filled not with hope, but the raw, unfiltered suspicion of someone who'd seen too much. "You real?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. Ethan hesitated. "I think so," he answered. The man called himself Dax, a former firefighter, the kind of man who ran into burning buildings without thinking twice. But now, the world wasn't burning. It was worse, it had gone still. Dax didn't trust easily. His questions came with glares, his movements deliberate, like he was always waiting for something or someone to betray him. They shared canned food in silence, slept in shifts. Ethan noticed that Dax never turned his back to him. When they passed the empty playground on the edge of the city, Dax froze. He stared at a rusted swing, gently swaying without wind, as if some ghost child had just left it behind. "My daughter used to love swings," he said, and that was all. They didn't speak much after that. But something unspoken passed between them, not quite friendship, but survival. Two minds, both scarred differently, trying not to remember the world before it died. It began with the light's strange, pulsing orbs that shimmered at the tree line, hovering like fireflies caught in dreams. But these were not insects. They didn't blink or dart, they watched. Ethan and Dax followed the lights into the woods, past trees that leaned inward as if bowing to some unseen force. The forest air was thick and warm, but not natural. It hummed, low and steady, like the slow breath of something sleeping beneath the soil. Then they found her. She was curled at the base of a twisted tree, her skin faintly glowing beneath the moonlight, hair clinging to her shoulders like threads of silver mist. Her eyes opened slowly, without fear but without recognition either. She spoke no words, only sounds, soft, broken syllables that dissolved in the air. Dax stepped back instantly, his hand on the axe. "That's not human," he muttered. Ethan, drawn by something he couldn't name, knelt beside her. She didn't shiver. She didn't bleed. And as she rose to her feet, Ethan noticed her bare feet left no prints in the soil. Wherever she stepped, the ground brightened, then dimmed like light breathing through earth. They brought her to an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town. That night, she stood silently in the garden, her eyes reflecting stars that didn't exist. Then she knelt and drew a symbol into the dirt, a circle split by a vertical line, surrounded by dots in an uneven orbit. It glowed faintly, just once. Ethan watched in silence. Dax shook his head. "She's not supposed to be here," he said. But Ethan wasn't so sure. Maybe, just maybe, she was here for a reason none of them were ready to understand. The days that followed blurred into silence, but the silence was no longer peaceful, it was thick with mistrust. Dax began to watch Lira with the eyes of a hunter, never speaking to her directly, but never looking away. Ethan noticed it, the tension in Dax's shoulders when Lira entered a room, the way his hand always hovered near the axe handle, the way he muttered to himself at night, as if justifying something. Lira, for her part, kept to herself, moving softly through the farmhouse like a ghost with memory. She never sat too close to Dax, and she never touched anything made of metal. She seemed drawn to still water, old wood, and sunlight filtered through dirty windows. She and Ethan began to understand each other not through words, but through rhythm, gesture, and quiet presence. One morning, while walking near the edge of the wheat fields, Ethan noticed strange symbols scorched into the earth. Spirals. Arcs. Points arranged in deliberate, mathematical patterns. They pulsed faintly, as if they weren't just marks but memories, or warnings. Dax found them too. He didn't speak. He just stared at the ground, then at Lira, then at Ethan. That night, he threw his tin plate into the fire and growled, "She's not just strange. She's wrong. This world, it changed when she got here." Ethan tried to reason with him, but Dax was slipping not into madness, but into something older, colder, the instinct to fear what doesn't belong. When he looked at Lira, he didn't see a woman anymore. He saw a trigger. A cause. A thing that took the world from him. And maybe, in some way, he wasn't entirely wrong. It was during the storm that Lira finally spoke. The clouds above had begun to spiral unnaturally, not rolling with thunder, but tightening inward like a drain pulling the sky into itself. Rain fell in steady, perfect rhythm, every drop landing in the same place it had the day before. The world was glitching, unraveling in slow motion. Inside the barn, Ethan and Dax sat opposite each other, saying nothing. Then Lira entered, soaked, her hair clinging to her skin, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She walked to the center of the room, pulled something from beneath her robe, a stone, smooth and black, etched with tiny silver lines that moved when touched. She placed it on the floor. Moonlight through a crack in the roof struck the stone and it opened. Not with hinges, but with light. A projection unfolded, a sky torn by violet lightning, a planet burning at the seams, towers crumbling into oceans of dust. And in the center Lira, younger, running. Not toward the portal. Away from fire. But it found her anyway. "I was trying to escape," she said, her voice low and calm. "The gate opened, but it was not meant to touch this world. It fractured when I passed through." Ethan stared at her, barely breathing. Dax was frozen. "You caused it," he whispered. Lira looked down. "My presence triggered the rift. It wasn't a weapon. It was a misstep. A tear between realities. And your world was too soft to resist it?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Can you fix it?" She shook her head. "No. What has been erased cannot be redrawn. Not fully." The barn was quiet again, save for the sound of rain falling in exact repetition. Lira looked at them both, one with hope, one with hate, and sat down, folding her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for anything. She simply waited. As if she had done this before, on other planets, in other silences, long ago. The barn had not slept in days. Something in the walls had started to creak even without wind, and the air smelled faintly of iron and ozone, the kind of scent that came before lightning, or collapse. Dax was no longer speaking in full sentences. He paced in circles, sharpening the edge of his axe on a stone that didn't belong to the barn, whispering fragments of memories that bled into threats. Ethan tried to hold the balance, but Lyra's presence, her silence, her impossible stillness, it had become too much. And then, it happened. Dax found her stone again, the black one with moving silver lines, pulsing like a heartbeat no one could name. He grabbed it, lifted his axe, and growled, "It ends now." Ethan leapt between them, shouting her name without knowing why, grabbing Dax's arm just as the blade came down. The axe missed barely. A struggle. Dust rising. Breath clashing with breath. And then Lira screamed. It wasn't sound. It was pressure. A wave of something raw and ancient, older than matter. The world bent. The walls of the barn flexed outward like lungs gasping underwater. The windows shattered inward without breaking. Time stuttered. Color faded, returned, inverted. They all fell. Ethan collapsed first, clutching his chest, heart beating backwards. Dax stumbled, eyes wide, mouth open but speechless, and inside his head, the visions came. Cities burning in reverse. Oceans falling upward into skies made of broken mirrors. 1,000 versions of himself, some laughing, some dying, some kneeling before Lira, some turning to dust. Alien screams echoed in languages his bones remembered but his mind had never learned. The light flickered inside his skull, and for a moment he saw the truth, that the universe was not built on laws, but on threads fragile, tangled, trembling. And she, Lira, was a knot the universe hadn't meant to tie. He screamed and covered his face, not from fear but from recognition. Ethan, too, saw glimpses but softer, slower. He saw the shape of Lyra's world, the shimmer of her memories, the ache of something lost across stars. And in the center of it all, her, not a destroyer, not a monster, but a fracture wrapped in skin, trying not to break again. They woke to stillness, but not the kind they knew. This stillness was hollow. The kind left behind after something had been peeled away. The trees outside had shifted, no longer pointing up, but slightly inward, toward a central place they could not see. The clouds moved in circular patterns, unnatural, mathematical. Insects hovered mid-air, wings frozen, as if time around them had failed to load. Lira stood near the threshold of the barn, her face lit by the glow of her still pulsing stone. The air around her hummed not like music, but like a signal. "The rift is widening," she said. Her voice was steady now. "Solid. This world is fraying. The layers are no longer holding. If it continues," she looked at Ethan. Then at Dax. "It will all fall inward. Not with fire. With forgetting. Your earth will become a hollow place, a space with no memory of what it once held." Dax sat in a corner, head between his hands, not speaking. He looked older now. Smaller. As if the visions had drained something essential from him. Ethan asked the only question that mattered. "Can we stop it?" Lira nodded once. "Yes. But not with force. Only with balance. A reset. A trade." She lifted the stone. It unfolded like paper made of starlight. One life willingly given. Energy for energy. To seal what was torn. Silence followed. Long and thick and heavy. Dax stood, laughing once, hollow and cracked. "You brought this, and now you want us to die for it?" He kicked the wall. "No. Burn it all. Let it end." Ethan didn't speak. He looked at Lira, and in her, he saw no victory, no salvation, only exhaustion. She had run through 1,000 realities to escape, and in every one, this moment had waited for her. She didn't ask him to choose. She only looked at him, and waited. The wind had stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Leaves hung in the air like paused thoughts, and dust no longer fell, but floated, unsure of which way to go. The sky above shimmered with fractures, long, jagged lines of white light, as if someone had cracked the dome of the heavens with a silent scream. At the heart of the forest clearing, the reset core now pulsed like a beating heart made of stone and starlight. It was no longer dormant. It had awakened, as if aware the time had come. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his body heavy with something more than weight, a kind of gravity that pressed on the soul. Lira stood beside the device, her skin flickering between forms, sometimes human, sometimes translucent, sometimes composed entirely of faint, drifting patterns like constellations seen through smoke. Her eyes met his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Behind them, Dax watched, silent, bruised, half in shadow. His hands hung limp at his sides, the axe forgotten in the grass. Guilt etched itself across his face, but his fear held him rooted to the earth. He would not follow. Ethan reached the core. It opened as he neared, like a flower responding to warmth. The glow intensified, pale blue at first, then white, then colorless, like the moment before birth. Lira handed him the shard, the same black crystal she had used to show him her world. Only now, it no longer showed fire. It showed him standing in this very place, over and over again, across lifetimes. The choice had always been his. And he had always made it. He placed the shard into the heart of the core. The world stopped. The wind, the sounds, the ache in his ribs, everything became still. Lira stepped closer. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but clearer than it had ever been. "You saw me," she whispered, her fingers brushing his hand. "Even when the world didn't." Her form began to dissolve, not into dust, but into light shaped like memory, dispersing gently across the air, merging with the brightness now arising from the ground. The core pulsed once, then expanded. And then came the light, total, endless, silent, not white, not gold, but something beyond color. It did not burn. It revealed. Ethan awoke not with breath, but with awareness, as though he had returned not from sleep, but from forgetting. He lay on a beach of black sand that glistened like obsidian, where waves rolled in slow motion under a sky that pulsed like a heartbeat. Above him, 3 moons hung in perfect harmony, one pale gold, one blue like deep water, and one a shifting violet mist that refused to stay still. Their light overlapped in a soft triangle on his chest, warming him without heat. He sat up slowly. His clothes were not burned. His skin was whole. But the air smelled like nothing he had ever known, sweet and electric, ancient and alive. Beside him, Lira sat with legs folded beneath her, watching the horizon. She was different now, not alien, not human, but a blend of both. Her eyes still shimmered like silver, but her body no longer flickered. She was solid, present, calm. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Ahead, across the shimmering dunes, figures began to appear, first like fog, then shadows, then shapes. People. Blurred at the edges, as if memory had begun sculpting them but hadn't finished yet. Ethan watched them, breath held. He recognized some, or thought he did. One of them turned, and for a single second, it was himself walking from the mist, staring back with the same quiet wonder. Then the figure faded. The moons above slowly drifted into alignment. For a heartbeat, they formed a perfect ring in the sky, the very symbol Lira had drawn in the dirt, long ago. And within that ring, light gathered, not falling like rays, but rising, as if the planet itself was exhaling something sacred. Ethan felt no fear. No need for questions. Only the stillness of knowing that this was not the end of the story, but the place where stories began again. Lira looked at him. No words. Just the smallest smile, the kind that only exists between souls who have walked through fire and found something softer on the other side. He closed his eyes. And somewhere between what was and what comes next, a voice, hers, perhaps his own, whispered, "To survive is not enough. To see, to be seen, that is where life begins." A broken world. 2 men on the edge of trust. And a woman, or something beyond woman, who carried the weight of entire realities inside her skin. Ethan chose to see her. Not as a threat, but as something lost, like him. In the end, it wasn't the machines or the power that saved them. It was a single moment of connection that rewrote the fabric of everything. So now I ask you, would you have trusted her? Could you have walked into the light not knowing what waited on the other side? And what do you think this new world really is? A dream? A rebirth? Or a doorway to something even stranger? Leave your thoughts below. I read every single one. And if you think this was the end, just wait until you hear what was waiting on the other side of the rift. Our next story might not begin where you think it does. Welcome to the Alien Storyverse. You're not alone.